All right, we're on chapter 17, the foundations of Christian society in Western Europe. And we're going to be talking about the first heading. And the College Board wants us to be focusing on the fact that Europe was politically fragmented and characterized by decentralized monarchies, feudalism, and the manor system. So this first heading is called The Quest for Political Order. Before I get to that, just so you know, the post-classical time period for Europe, for Western Europe, is usually broken up into three different categories: early Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, and late Middle Ages. We are talking about the early Middle Ages today, kind of like the beginning of that Byzantine chapter we did on chapter 13. Next time I talk to you, we'll talk about the high Middle Ages, and then we'll loop around again for the Renaissance and moving into a new era for Europe. When it comes to whether you should call this the Dark Ages or Middle Ages, to be honest, just don't call it the Dark Ages. That's an old way of kind of looking at it. The modern way of looking at this time period is just as a middle time between the Roman Empire and the explosion of power that Europe is going to see in the next era of discovery and beyond. But this period is called the quest for political order, and for good reason. So the Roman Empire is going to have a lot of issues at the end. It's going to split into two eventually, and we've already learned about the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantines, but they consider themselves the Roman Empire. The western half of the Roman Empire is the one that's going to have all sorts of issues, and so they have been facing invasion after invasion after invasion. Finally, the Germanic Odoacer in 476 is basically going to depose the last Roman emperor. Now, even though the emperor is gone, the administrative apparatus is still in place, but the major cities are going to lose many members of their population because we don't have this Roman Empire kind of holding everything together. When it comes to the Germanic successor states, we're going to have kind of the Visigoths, which are going to occupy what we know as Spain today. The Ostrogoths will be occupying what we consider as much of Italy. France back then was called Gaul when it was part of the Roman Empire. And then Britain at that point, what we think of Britain today is going to have the Angles and Saxons and several other groups. But the main group we're going to talk about is the one that's in the middle purple here, which are the Franks. The Franks are going to really kind of set the stage for all the other regional kingdoms that are going to come after. They are going to have a really strong agricultural base, and they are the start of the economic center of Europe moving to the north. Before, it was focused on the Roman Empire, and it was focused on trade along the Mediterranean Sea. And what's going to happen is these empires are going to kind of develop outside of that. And so the other thing the Franks are going to do, which are going to be very important, is going to be to create an alliance with the Western Christian Church, which we will know today and after the schism as the Roman Catholic Church. So the first leader is Clovis that we need to talk about. He's the first major Frankish leader, and he is going to be the one who's going to get rid of the administration, the last Roman administration that was in Gaul. He's going to dominate the other Germanic peoples around him. And when I'm talking Germanic people, I'm not talking about like one group of people. We're going to be talking about hundreds. And the last slide, I'll really show you this. Okay? But as you can see, one of the big reasons he's going to be in power is from this image here. And that is he is going to create the alliance with the Western Christian Church. Again, what we would know after the schism as the Roman Catholic Church. You see either paganism, local, usually nature-based religions, or Arian Christianity, which I haven't done too much studying on it, but is very different than Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox. A lot of it has to do with the idea of what Jesus was and who he was. But what's important to note is that Clovis actually chooses to join the Roman Catholic Church, and therefore so does his army and his people. His wife Clotilda was a devout, what we would consider Catholic. And what this is doing is setting the stage for the Roman Catholic Church to have kind of a military, in a way, kind of a military arm. And the organization, or the political organization, having the blessing of the church. Much more of that in heading 3. So Clovis's family starts to create the Frankish kingdom, and then the next great leader is going to be Charles the Hammer Martel. And although he's going to be under the under the Clovis's family, his children are going to basically take over and create this Carolingian dynasty. Karl the Hammer Martel comes to prominence for defeating the Spanish Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732. This is very important for Western Europe, especially for Christianity, because it was the stop of the Muslim invasions, which had started in what we know as Spain today. As they made their way through the Pyrenees, Charles was there to stop him with the military. And what's going to happen is Charles' children. Now, this is going to be a lot like in South Asia. So, if we just look on paper here, the Carolingian Empire is going to be very large, from the Pyrenees all the way into much of what we would consider Germany today, down into Italy. The thing is that it's not going to last very long. Its highlight is going to be just with Charles's grandson, Charlemagne, who's going to rule from 768 to 814, and he is going to be the one to really create kind of centralized imperial rule. He himself is going to be illiterate, but he's going to see the importance of bureaucracy and scholarship and having smart bureaucrats within his organization. He's going to have major military achievements. However, he's going to be a lot like King Harsha, in that Harsha in South Asia, who also has this really large kingdom for a little bit of time. And although it's quote unquote centralized, it really isn't, because there's all of these different lords and rulers who have all these little pieces of land. And so, like Harsha, Charlemagne is going to spend much of his time traveling throughout. He is going to have his own imperial officials called the Missi Dominici, who are going to try to be his eyes and ears. But with so many different leaders and so many different people to control, he's going to spend most of his time traveling. And so what will end up happening is he has this incredibly impressive run, but he is such a diplomat, he is going to shun the idea of being an emperor for much of his time. And even though he is in charge, it's going to take Pope Leo III to crown him an emperor in 800 to have him officially kind of take this title. There is some historical question of whether Charlemagne was in on it, or whether it was just in the midst of this very famous Christmas Day service where Pope Leo crowns him. But Charlemagne knew what precarious balance he had with all of these different rulers, and he also was very hesitant to challenge the Byzantine Empire or the Abbasids. And if he saw himself or tried to claim to become a Roman emperor, he knows that could be seen as a challenge by the Byzantine Empire, who he didn't want to fight. What will happen is that when Charlemagne dies, the kingdom will fall to Louis, and already it will start to fall apart. Again, there's a lot of different groups within this. And then when Louis dies, then all heck breaks loose. Because his empire is going to be divided amongst his three sons, who are going to fight amongst themselves. And don't worry, they'll have a lot of other people to fight as well. As you can see, the Muslims are going to come from the south and attack from the Mediterranean Sea. You're going to have the Magyars, who are going to come from the east, from Eastern Europe or the Ukraine, and they're going to attack the Carolingian Empire. And then all of the screen here is this amazing group called the Vikings. So as you can see here, already the Carolingian Empire is broken into three, and then just everything falls apart, partially from these guys. So the Vikings are a very interesting group to study. They are sometimes just given the are misrepresented as just kind of brainless warriors, but they really are much more than that. They are incredibly tough. They live in Scandinavia. And they're going to start expanding really in about 800 CE. And we're guessing what happened is that their population just started to get too big. They also had their own very important religion that they followed, and they were hostile towards Christianity as it kept spreading north and north and north. One of the ways they're going to be so successful is with their naval technology that they're going to create. And if you take a look at the two maps, you can see that they're going to be able to travel throughout. You can see the Vikings, from basically based out of Sweden, are going to be active in Eastern Europe and use boats down those rivers. You'll see the Danish will go all throughout the Mediterranean. And what's interesting is the Norwegians not only are going to, attack and start to settle in Ireland, but they're going to make it to Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, which is part of Canada today. And one of the reasons why I use these maps is not only to kind of see everywhere that they go, but the top map helps to show you that it's an impressive feat, but it's a much shorter journey than what Columbus is going to do when he goes from Spain to get to the Caribbean. Okay? So the Vikings are actually the first Europeans to settle in the Americas. They don't last long, but they're the first ones to settle there. And again, the reason they're able to kind of move all over the place here is from their naval technology. So Vikings actually comes from the Norwegian city of Vik, but we usually use it to talk about all sorts of Norse invaders and people. So what they're able to do is they create this really interesting idea of a boat with a very shallow draft, which means it's very short. So as you can see in the image there, that it's actually kind of a wide ship, but it's very narrow. It's not very deep. Okay, now that's crucial because not only does it allow you to travel in the ocean, but it also is going to allow you to travel along rivers. And so it's going to be easy for them to attack, different villages throughout, starting in the 9th century, and they're going to even get to like Constantinople and be able to sack them a few times or take goods from them. And so the reason why they're going to be so effective is the other groups aren't going to have very strong militarized navies. Especially the Carolingians are not going to have a navy themselves. They're just going to be dependent on kind of the outskirts of the region to fight off these Vikings, which again is not going to make the Carolingian leaders very popular whatsoever. If they're not going to help, then why are they in charge? So at the end of like kind of the early Middle Ages here, we're starting to see the map kind of really form when we think of Europe today. The Vikings are actually going to help form what we would consider England today, because it's going to force all the other groups, the Anglo-Saxons and Utes and all the other groups that are there, to kind of band together. And they're going to band together under, before he helped Batman and Bruce Wayne, Alfred first became the King of England. And so he's going to unite them to help fight off these different Viking attacks. We're going to start to have a navy in the British Isles, and they're going to fortify their cities to be able to fight off those attacks. Which leads us to the last slide. So again, France itself, especially in the northern parts, is going to have issues with heavy Viking settlements. But again, once the Carolingian Empire falls apart, then there's a lot of just regional and smaller groups that are going to rise up, and regional authorities to try to take control. In what we would consider Germany today, there's another group I need to talk about, which is the King Otto of Saxony, who's going to defeat those Magyars, which you saw in the earlier map coming from the east. And he's going to save the Catholic Church, and he's going to save that group. And so he's going to be proclaimed emperor by the Pope. But and that's the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, which again, famously, as by Voltaire, was neither holy nor Roman nor really an empire. And the reason why you could argue it wasn't really an empire is this map, which I love, which just shows you all of the different groups, all of the competing politicians and lords, and who have different small little pieces here. So if you're going to try to rule that empire, you've got to get all of those groups to agree on things, which is very, very difficult to do. That's heading one. I'll see you later.